The Maji Rebellion, which took place between 1905 and 1907 in what is today Tanzania, stands as one of the most significant and tragic events in the history of African resistance against European colonialism. The uprising was rooted in widespread discontent with German colonial rule, which had imposed harsh labor practices, excessive taxation, and severe cultural disruptions on the indigenous populations of East Africa. The rebellion was not just a response to these oppressive policies, but also a profound expression of the indigenous people's struggle to preserve their autonomy, dignity, and cultural identity in the face of an increasingly aggressive colonial power. The seeds of the Maji Rebellion were sown in the late 19th and early 20th centuries when the German Empire established its control over what was then known as German East Africa. The colonial administration implemented a series of policies aimed at extracting maximum economic benefit from the colony, often at the expense of the local population. One of the most egregious of these policies was the forced cultivation of cash crops, particularly cotton. The Germans demanded that African farmers grow cotton for export rather than food crops, disrupting traditional agricultural practices and leading to widespread hunger and economic hardship. The situation was exacerbated by the brutal enforcement of these policies by German officials and their African allies, who used violence and coercion to ensure compliance. The resentment against German rule was further fueled by the imposition of taxes, which were often collected in a manner that was both arbitrary and cruel. The hut tax, a levy imposed on every household, was particularly hated, as it forced many families into a cycle of debt and impoverishment. Those who could not pay were subjected to harsh punishments, including beatings, imprisonment, and the seizure of property. The Germans also disrupted traditional social structures by undermining the authority of local chiefs and imposing their own system of administration, which was often corrupt and ineffective. This erosion of traditional power and social norms created a deep sense of alienation and resentment among the African population. Against this backdrop of oppression and discontent, a charismatic spiritual leader named Kinjekitile Ngwale emerged in the southern region of the colony. Kinjekitile claimed to have been possessed by a spirit, known as Hongo, which gave him the power to protect his followers from German bullets. He preached a message of resistance, urging the people to rise up against their oppressors. Central to Kinjekitile's teachings was the belief in the magical properties of Maji, a sacred water that he claimed would render the Germans' weapons ineffective. This belief in the protective power of Maji spread rapidly among the various ethnic groups in the region, giving rise to the name Maji for the rebellion. The Maji Rebellion began in July 1905 when a group of insurgents attacked a German cotton plantation in the Matumbi Hills. This initial act of resistance quickly escalated into a widespread revolt that engulfed much of southern and central Tanzania. The rebellion was characterized by its broad-based support, as it drew participants from a wide range of ethnic groups, including the Matumbi, Ngoni, Pagoro, Bena, and others. Despite their diverse backgrounds, the rebels were united by a common desire to overthrow German rule and restore their autonomy. The early stages of the rebellion were marked by a series of successful attacks on German outposts, plantations, and trading posts. The rebels employed guerrilla tactics, using their knowledge of the local terrain to ambush German troops and disrupt colonial supply lines. The Germans, initially caught off guard by the scale and intensity of the uprising, struggled to contain the rebellion. However, the belief in the protective power of Maji proved to be a tragic delusion. The German forces, equipped with modern firearms and artillery, were able to inflict devastating losses on the poorly armed and poorly organized rebels. The Maji, far from providing protection, left the rebels vulnerable to the overwhelming firepower of the colonial troops. As the rebellion spread, the German authorities responded with brutal repression. They launched a series of military campaigns aimed at crushing the insurgency and reasserting control over the colony. The German forces, under the command of Governor Gustav Adolf von Gotzen, adopted a scorched earth policy, destroying villages, crops, and food supplies in an effort to starve the rebels into submission. The Germans also employed African auxiliaries, known as askari, who were often recruited from other regions of the colony or from neighboring territories. These askari were used to conduct raids and punitive expeditions against the rebels, often with little regard for civilian lives. The human cost of the Maji rebellion was staggering. It is estimated that between 200,000 and 300,000 Africans died as a result of the conflict, either from violence, starvation, or disease. The German response to the rebellion was characterized by extreme brutality, with entire communities being wiped out in retaliation for their support of the insurgents. The scorched earth tactics employed by the Germans led to widespread famine, as the destruction of crops and food stores left many communities without the means to survive. The rebellion also had a devastating impact on the social fabric of the region, as traditional authority structures were further eroded, and the bonds of trust and cooperation among different ethnic groups were severely strained. Despite the eventual defeat of the Maji rebellion, the uprising had a profound and lasting impact on the history of Tanzania and the broader struggle against colonialism in Africa. The rebellion exposed the inherent weaknesses and vulnerabilities of colonial rule, demonstrating that even the most powerful empires could be challenged by determined and organized resistance. It also highlighted the deep-seated grievances and aspirations of the African population, who sought to reclaim their autonomy and protect their cultural heritage in the face of foreign domination. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the German authorities implemented a series of reforms aimed at addressing some of the underlying causes of the uprising. These included efforts to improve the administration of the colony, reduce the burden of taxation, and provide more support for African agriculture. However, these reforms were often half-hearted and ineffective, and they did little to address the deep-seated resentment and mistrust that had been engendered by the brutal suppression of the rebellion. The memory of the Maji rebellion continued to resonate among the people of Tanzania, serving as a powerful symbol of resistance and a reminder of the costs of colonial oppression. In the broader context of African history, the Maji rebellion occupies a significant place as one of the early large-scale uprisings against European colonial rule. It foreshadowed later struggles for independence across the continent, as African peoples increasingly sought to challenge and overthrow the colonial systems that had been imposed upon them. The rebellion also highlighted the complex interplay between traditional beliefs and modern political movements, as the spiritual dimension of the Maji uprising demonstrated the ways in which indigenous worldviews could be mobilized in the service of resistance and liberation. Today, the Maji rebellion is remembered as a key moment in the history of Tanzania and the broader struggle for African independence. It is commemorated in various forms, including monuments, museums, and educational programs, which seek to honor the memory of those who fought and died in the uprising. The rebellion also continues to inspire contemporary movements for social justice and decolonization, as the legacy of resistance against oppression and the fight for autonomy remains a central theme in the ongoing struggle for human dignity and freedom in Africa and beyond. The Maji rebellion serves as a poignant reminder of the costs of colonialism and the enduring spirit of resistance that has characterized the history of Africa. It underscores the importance of understanding and acknowledging the historical experiences of colonized peoples, as well as the need to critically engage with the legacies of colonialism that continue to shape the world today. Through its enduring impact on the collective memory and identity of the Tanzanian people, the Maji rebellion stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of those who have fought for their rights and their freedom in the face of overwhelming odds.